Wait, Apple's secretly building custom chips exclusively for China, and these aren't minor variants. According to the Financial Times, the company is testing new CXMT processors for iPhones, iPads, and Macs sold inside China's borders. Why? Because Apple learned the hard way that geopolitical winds are shifting, and being caught without a backup plan in your second-largest market is career-threatening. This isn't a minor iOS tweak or regional software feature. This is Apple replicating the entire custom chip revolution it pioneered with the A-series and M-series, but exclusively for one nation. Think of it like how Tesla builds different cars for different regions, except Apple typically treats the whole world as one unified design. That's changing. The stakes are enormous. If United States-China trade tensions escalate further, Apple could lose access to critical manufacturing capacity overnight. A China-only chip is insurance. It signals to Beijing that Apple's serious about staying long-term, which buys political goodwill when tariffs come knocking. Apple makes over a quarter of its revenue in China. Losing that market would devastate shareholders, so the company is hedging its bets, investing billions into custom silicon specifically for one nation. But here's where it gets interesting. This move sets up a technological arms race inside Apple itself. Once you've got a custom chip pipeline running for China, the pressure mounts to expand it everywhere else. Apple didn't invent custom chips, it perfected them. Back in 2015, the company shipped the A9 processor in the iPhone 6s. At the time, executives in Cupertino seemed reckless. Why make your own chips when Qualcomm had been doing it reliably for decades? The answer was control. With custom silicon, Apple controls performance, power efficiency, battery life, and security all at once. No waiting for Qualcomm's release cycles, no compromises. It worked brilliantly. The A-series chips became legendary. Samsung scrambled to build its own Exynos chips. Qualcomm kept fighting back. Within 10 years, custom silicon became essential for any major tech company. Then in 2020, Apple shocked the industry again with the M1 MacBook chip. Suddenly, laptops running Apple's own ARM-based processor outperformed Intel's best efforts, burned a fraction of the power, and cost less to manufacture. The M-series became a runaway success. That victory proved something crucial to Apple's board. The company could design chips that matched and beat tech industry giants. So when geopolitical tensions with China intensified over recent years, Apple's executives realized they had a new superpower. They could build a chip exclusively for China. This wasn't about raw innovation or engineering bragging rights. This was about survival and market access. So what exactly is the CXMT chip, and why is it different? First, the basics. CXMT likely stands for a China variant designation. Think of it as the A-series processor, but with China-specific optimizations. Apple's had years to study what Chinese consumers actually use their devices for: different apps, different connectivity standards, different security policies mandated by Beijing. A China-only chip lets Apple bake all of that directly into silicon. The real innovation isn't raw computing power. International A-series chips are already phenomenal. It's everything around the edges: cryptography standards, data handling protocols, how the chip communicates with Chinese networks. Apple's probably designing CXMT to pass every security requirement Beijing throws at it without compromising performance. This is like building a car specifically for Australian roads: same engine, different suspension, different headlight orientation, because the rules are different. The geopolitical angle is crucial. By building a China-only chip, Apple sends a powerful signal to Beijing's government. It says, "We're not treating you like an afterthought. We're investing billions because you matter." That political goodwill could protect Apple if trade wars escalate and United States-China tensions intensify. China could theoretically ban iPhones tomorrow. But if Apple's built a homegrown chip for them, proof of long-term commitment, that pressure weakens significantly. And here's what makes this complicated. When will you actually see a CXMT chip? The Financial Times reports Apple is currently testing them. That means production probably starts within the next 6 to 18 months. iPhone 16 Pro models sold in China could debut the CXMT variant sometime in 2027 or 2028. Same brilliant design, same camera system, same Face ID technology, but with a custom processor under the hood built specifically for that market. iPad Pros and Mac Minis sold in China would follow shortly after. Here's what this means for Chinese consumers. Your iPhone doesn't suddenly become faster or slower. You probably won't notice any practical difference in day-to-day usage. But that CXMT chip ensures maximum compatibility with Chinese apps, Chinese payment systems, Chinese social media platforms, WeChat, Alipay, Douyin. It speaks the language of Chinese networks natively. For developers in China, this opens new possibilities. Apple could optimize features specifically for the Chinese market without compromising the international version. Imagine filters in photos that understand traditional Chinese characters natively. Imagine Siri understanding Mandarin dialect variations better. Imagine battery efficiency tweaked for how Chinese users actually charge their phones. The subtle stuff that makes a market experience feel tailored rather than generic. But here's the thing that changes everything. This move also signals that Apple is preparing for a possible scenario where it can't manufacture iPhones internationally for Chinese distribution anymore. This isn't a first for the tech industry. Huawei, Apple's biggest competitor in China, already builds its own chips exclusively for its Huawei phones. The Kirin processor is specifically designed for Chinese networks and Chinese users. Samsung does the same in some markets with the Exynos chip. What makes Apple's move significant is the timing and the scale. Apple's not just making a slightly different variant. It's replicating its entire custom chip success story, but domestically for one nation. Compare this to Microsoft or Google's strategies. Microsoft rarely customizes for specific markets. It builds globally standardized products. Google's in a unique position, banned from mainland China, so it can't tailor anything. Apple's different. It's got massive revenue in China, manufacturing relationships in China, and tons at stake if geopolitical tensions escalate. The chip for country strategy is actually smart hedging. If United States tariffs on Chinese-made goods skyrocket, or if export controls tighten further, Apple's already got a China-focused processor ready. It's a backup plan. It's like an insurance policy written in silicon. Other Western tech companies are watching closely. Microsoft could theoretically build custom processors for specific markets. Meta could do the same, but Apple's moving first. They are proving the model works at scale, and that changes the entire competitive landscape. The message to Beijing is unmistakable. What does this mean for the tech industry? First, geopolitical fragmentation is becoming hardware reality. For decades, we've assumed global electronics would converge toward one unified design. What works in New York works in Shanghai. That assumption is breaking. Now, major tech powers are going to demand localized hardware. India could push Apple for India-specific chips. Europe could demand European privacy-optimized processors. Each region becomes its own market, with its own silicon. That's massively expensive, but Apple can afford it. Second, this gives Apple massive leverage with Beijing. A United States company investing billions into China-exclusive technology is a negotiating asset. If trade tensions spike, Apple can argue it's too entangled with Chinese industry to sanction. That's intentional. Apple's essentially making itself indispensable to China's tech ecosystem. Third, watch what Qualcomm does. For decades, Qualcomm sold modems and processors to everyone, even Apple's competitors. If Apple's going vertically integrated for China, Qualcomm loses leverage in that market. Qualcomm will probably lobby hard for government protection. And fourth, this accelerates a tech Cold War dynamic. The United States and China will build increasingly incompatible tech stacks. Interoperability suffers. But the stakes become so high that neither side backs down. This pattern repeats in batteries, displays, and foundries, and the consumer eventually pays the price. Here's how to think about why big tech companies design custom hardware for specific markets. It starts with understanding that geography is now destiny in tech. 50 years ago, geography didn't matter much. A factory was a factory. But today, where you build hardware determines whose rules you follow. Build iPhones in Taiwan, and you're dependent on Taiwanese supply chains and United States-China relations. Build them in India, and you're dependent on Indian labor laws and regulatory approval. Build chip designs in California and fabricate them in China, and you're caught between two governments. So smart companies don't just think about engineering. They think like chess players. Apple's move with CXMT is chess. It's saying, we are willing to invest in a China-specific supply chain because that market is too valuable to risk. This same logic applies to data centers, factories, and cloud infrastructure. Microsoft builds Azure data centers in European countries, specifically so European data stays in Europe and complies with European privacy law. Amazon does the same. It's not just about technology. It's about building redundancy, compliance, and negotiating power into the hardware itself. You can't export a chip that doesn't exist in another country. You can't sanction a company that's this entangled with your economy. So understanding custom hardware is understanding modern geopolitical power plays. Apple's CXMT chip is a masterclass in geopolitical hedging disguised as a technical announcement. The company isn't building a China-specific chip because it's technically necessary. A-series chips work perfectly fine everywhere. It's building it because Apple's executives understand the future of tech will be fragmented by geography. Build redundancy into your supply chain, and you survive trade wars. Invest visibly in a market, and you earn political goodwill. Develop a vertically integrated approach for one region, and you're prepared if global integration breaks down. Here's what to watch for. When does the CXMT chip actually ship? Which devices get it first? Does Apple announce it publicly or quietly slip it into devices without fanfare? Does China's government tout it as a victory in tech self-sufficiency? And critically, does this strategy work? If Apple's China revenue stays stable despite United States-China tensions, then CXMT was brilliant. If it doesn't move the needle, Apple's spent billions on an insurance policy that wasn't needed. Either way, CXMT represents a fundamental change in how tech companies think about supply chains. Apple's no longer betting on global integration. It's betting on managed fragmentation. That's not innovation. That's survival. And survival shapes the tech industry we all use. Follow for daily AI news.